Okay, this is where once we went underneath that St. Bernard Bridge, there's Interstate 610. As you see, the interstate goes up and over. Right up there is where we landed the big Blackhawks and military helicopters to offload or to put on the sick and injured that were coming to us from the St. Bernard housing projects. We had sprayed a big, with a can of green paint, spray paint, we sprayed a big H up there for the military helicopters to land. And off to here this is what they're building now. These are quite a bit different than what was here before, which, like I said, has since been torn down. Looking at it, I mean, they're quite nice. What was here before is nothing. We call them the bricks, kind of like the bricks you see here, but not as fancy. And it was a very poor black community. I'm sure when you were looking at videos from Hurricane Katrina, they flew over and showed the St. Bernard housing projects with people waving. This is also where I mentioned people were shooting up in the air with guns to get attention, to get rescued. Pretty much everybody that lived in this housing project, which from my perspective here, I can't show you how large it was, but it was huge. I'm sure thousands of people were here. Pretty much everybody that was here stayed. You see, there's a sign there describing the projects that they're doing. Kind of impressed with what they're thinking about doing here. Now this is all going to be FHA or HUD, community structured. Sure, lots of people who deal in drugs, have 7 kids, will take advantage of this again. Like I said, they're pretty much, I would call them professionals at taking advantage of what the federal and state coffers can offer. Now, once this became too dangerous for us to stay here, we loaded up the deuce and a halfs and left from this area here on the interstate and proceeded over towards Poydras and to get over to the convention center. Okay, we proceeded along the interstate in the deuce and a half. Periodically we'd see groups of small people on the side of the road waiting for help, for something to come along and happen. When they saw us, they pretty much took their anger and frustration out on us, throwing whatever they had at us and cussing us. As we proceeded along towards Poydras, Mark Rice, operations manager, said for everybody to meet at the convention center on Convention Center Boulevard. And like I said, it's hard to describe, but this right down here is Claiborne. Easily had 12, 14 feet of water. Off to right there is the Lafitte housing projects, where I was telling the story about the old lady up on the second story. I was trying to get her son to get her out of the city. We whisked her away to the Superdome. I don't know how she turned out, but if you want to know what St. Bernard housing projects used to look like, that's them. These are known as the bricks. Now they're busy tearing these projects down here to do the same thing I was showing you over at the St. Bernard projects. Okay, we're coming up on Canal Street. I'm heading down towards Poydras. We're going to go by the Superdome. Now the water got a lot shallower here, maybe about 1 foot, 2 foot, once we got near the Superdome. And Poydras at one point didn't have any water as we proceeded towards the convention center. Okay, this is where we proceeded down Poydras. Off to our right here is the Superdome. before Katrina hit. Long lines extended out to the entrance to Superdome here as people at the last minute were seeking refuge from the storm. They were lined up all along here in front of the parking garage and all the way down to LaSalle. So we proceeded down Poydras. Off to our right here, we're coming up on the Hyatt, which was famous for losing its windows during Katrina. To our left here is City Hall off Poydras, and this back entrance here is where we loaded up, and the fire department brought them water so they could flush their toilets and stuff. But that's the back of City Hall. Okay, one of the building collapse structures I was telling you about is this building right here. This was completely knocked down. There was brick everywhere in the street. At this corner here is where we stopped the ambulance before proceeding into the city on several of our missions and to wait for clearance from General Henry. Remember I mentioned that bum that had lined up all the wino bottles out at the corner? Well, he was located right underneath here during the storm. That man had about 100 liquor bottles all stacked up, and he had set up a little cardboard box to take roost in and talking to himself. But that was the location. Convention Center Boulevard used to be the old entrance to the World Trade Center back in 1984. If you look straight ahead, you'll see the Hilton by the river. That's where Mark Rice and Dr. Juliette Sauce stayed during the storm. Now, if I had been running things, I would have located us there at the World Trade Center. You have a 360-degree panoramic view of the city, and also in one of the highest parts of the city when it comes to, in terms of flooding. All right, we just turned on the Convention Center Boulevard. We proceeded down the Deuce of Half. Now, at this time on Tuesday afternoon, this wasn't crowded with the swarm of people, if you remember from the news reports and stuff at that time, because people were still getting rescued, still trying to get out of the flooded portions of the city and get to this portion of the city that was on higher ground. Now, we proceeded on down to the Convention Center right up there, the Riverwalk. And met on the steps right in front of there. That's when I reported to you that Dr. Sauce and Mark Rice were in their Class A's, met us on those steps. A good portion of the police department was also housed here during the storm in deplorable conditions. Everything was backing up here, all the sewage. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people were taking refuge in the convention center at the time. And it was only going to get worse. But that's where it all happened. Now, we stayed at this location for a good 2 hours waiting to figure out what we were going to do. And we ate our MREs right there and hung out until Mark Rice told us to go down to the Aquarium of the Americas.